Alrighty, we stopped here. Actually, we started talking about the separation, or excuse me, the principles of powers in today's very, very exciting lecture. So let's talk real quick about separation of powers. And these are, again, my notes. And we kind of already touched bases on this, so I don't really want to go over it too much. But remember, tyranny, to Madison, tyranny was government that controlled all three branches of government. So he wanted the separation of powers to make sure that not one became too powerful. And then, so again, this just diffuses all that. Influenced by Montesquieu, and we talked about this today in class. The biggest thing here is you got the danger of one branch combining forces with another branch. But with checks and balances, you can you override that. That's even though that could be a danger, but typically it's not going to happen. And with the separation of powers, that's what you worry about. But thank God you have the checks and balances, because that will not happen. Because remember, certain branches of government check the others. So I'll let you look at the background here, what they are. But the biggest thing here is fear of tyranny among the founders. They have a distrust of government and checks and balances as means of intentionally building inefficiency in order to prevent government abuse of powers. That's, again, kind of the definition of it. And so what are checks and balances? This is just good right here. A system of restraints that are put in place there so that certain parts of the government cannot become too powerful. And so that's really what we were talking about today. We looked at all those different checks and balances and the things that the government can and can't do. And you guys did a pretty good job with that today. We were just finishing up with what exactly was the checks and balances and why again that is important. And we were doing that worksheet today and to make sure and to see what that was. Another thing that we want to look at is just some of the examples. We, again, refer to that worksheet. You got veto override, appointment and confirmation, treaty making, and blah, blah, blah. And so this stuff is on that worksheet and on that video and tells you what each branch does and why that is important to this. And so within this, you get that system of checks and balances to make sure that we do have the separation of powers that is there. Another thing that is important here, you have the political independence within each branch. No branch is dependent upon other two for election. And so now this part here, you got to remember this part though. Judges are appointed by the president. Remember, and then the Senate, through the Senate Judiciary Committee, will be the ones to either approve that nomination or they will not approve the nomination. One of the things that we also do with checks and balances is stagger terms within each branch. The majority of voters can gain control over one part of the government at one time. So midterm elections, the midterm Congress election can serve as a check of the executive. That's what happened when the Republicans took control of the House in 2010. I would put that here, circle that. Republicans took control of the House in 2010 because they were not happy with Obama. Thus, what you're going to have is what is going to be down here is a divided government. The president of one party and Congress is of the other. But yes, we have part of Congress is controlled by the Senate, but it's a very small margin. And so then you have the House of Representatives controlled by the Republicans. So they're not working together. So you get what we have now, which is called a divided government. Now here's some modifications to checks and balances, and these are either strengths or weaknesses of checks and balances. You got political parties, and like I says here in theory, it should strengthen checks and balances, bringing the branches closer together. However, the Constitution divides government, but parties bring people in government, which is true. So know that point. The Constitution divides government, but parties bring people into government. However, there's only really two parties. They dominate everything. Yes, I know the Green Party and the Independent Party. Well, you have that movement. You have the Freedom Party. You have all kinds of parties out there that do exist, but really two dominate our political landscape. And so that kind of weakens this theory because they have a wide range of things that they need to cover, wide range of interests, and many parties do not agree with each other within the party. Look at today's headlines. I put on Twitter today that article that we were talking about in class about the senator who's trying to win office in Missouri talking about rape in women and pregnancies. And Mitt Romney, in his own party, is telling him, stop, leave the race. And that's because, again, it's difficult for the parties to stay together because there's so many different opinions. So, yes, there's only two parties. They bring people together, but yet they also make people not like government, create a disdain for government, and weaken the political parties and their influence because of what the parties have become. And again, that divided government, know that term is very important. We talked about this today. There's also what can again either be a strength or weakness to checks and balances is changing in the voting methods. Senators now chosen by the people, that put here, that's the 17th Amendment. Remember, they were once chosen by the state legislators. Congressmen and women are chosen by people. Now, the presidents are chosen by electors who vote as the people have voted. So, like it says here, the members of the two branches are chosen by the same quote-unquote electorate, by the people. Weakening checks and balances in theory, however, split ticket voting has changed this. Where what that means is people might vote the president one thing and then vote their congressman another. So they don't vote the same ticket. They don't vote the same thing on that ticket. So that weakens this. You also have the growth of federal bureaucracy and how that's just gotten bigger. The agency, the government itself has gotten bigger. We use an example here, the IRS, and how that was formed to collect taxes, and then Congress granted the IRS the authority to help write the tax code, which makes them very, very powerful, and enforce the tax code and settle disputes over the tax code. So what's really checking the IRS for checks and balances? They're the ones who write the tax code. They're the one who collects taxes and enforces the taxes. So you got the growth of this federal bureaucracy that essentially is weakening part of the idea and the notion of checks and balances. So that right there is what that is saying. So the growth of bureaucracy has caused a weakening of checks and balances, like I was saying. Next one is change in technology, not what you think with less, but how different things have changed. Like it says, President, Congress, interest groups, media have all been able to take advantage of new technology. Strengthening checks and balances. Look at Twitter. Look at Facebook. Look at how things are going now. That is an example of how the checks and balances has completely changed because the president now has access. It's a positive and a negative because sometimes there's too much access. I also sent an article out today about congressmen swimming, skinny dipping in a lake in Israel and how that has led to conflict and how, because it was sacred, that lake is. And for him to do this, again, is seen as a sign of disrespect. But we wouldn't know all this stuff, again, without technology and how technology's changed things for a positive and negative. And then also, presidents have taken advantage of this, and they said Bush with the staged event landing on an aircraft carrier, thus weakening checks and balances because the president can gain a lot of power through this. And again, technology can be a negative and a positive. The negative, again, would be the access, politicians manipulating the press and the technology for their own benefit, therefore skewing the eyes of politicians and the American people and weakening certain branches, checking the other branches because they might not feel that that's their thing to do. And another big one here is the emergence of the U.S. after World War II. We become a leader and superpower of the Cold War, a lot of responsibilities. And because we have a lot of responsibilities, that means there's this thing here called the imperial presidency, and how power has grown so much in the executive branch because of our emergence of a world power after World War II, that this weakens checks and balances because the president has more power and uses that power to his advantage. Look at Vietnam. Look at the Korean War. We never declared war, but the president, again, was able to send troops out. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is an example of that in Vietnam because we had to stop the spread of communism. So the president was getting more and more power and abusing that power. Nixon trying to invoke executive privilege because you didn't want to have the tapes from the scandal out there because it's too important. So those things and how we've grown on the world stage has given the president more power, thus weakening the checks and balance system that is put in place. Moving on again to some of the principles of the Constitution, which you're doing for homework tonight. You have limited government. We talked about that and what that is, and how the government is limited to the powers that are set there from the Constitution. I talked about Amendment 10 today. Focused on that, how Amendment 10 was important, and how that it reflects the view that states have substantial powers. Again, I'll review this with you real quick. Central government could exercise only those powers delegated to it by the Constitution. That's very big. States would have all else, which means that states have the rest of the power that is not delegated to the central government to control the states, which is a big thing. So this 10th Amendment is very, very important. And then you got the free elections, which Madison's auxiliary precautions to what could happen with people. Big one right here, and this is where we'll stop at today, and that's judicial review. Very big. Powers of the courts to strike down laws or government actions. Put down, again, constitutional, unconstitutional. Highlight this, underline this. And how was this established? This was established by Marbury versus Madison. Now, this was not, like it says here, in the Constitution as it was written, but it was established by Marbury versus Madison because what happened. Here's some of the facts of the case that you really need to know, just in case you have to write about this on an AP exam. That's why that is in bold. At the end of the Federalist control of government, the appointment of the quote-unquote midnight judges, when one person's leaving office, you're going to have these midnight judges, whether they're justices of the peace or whatever, including one of them was Marbury. They were going to all be appointed judges when he left office. We just had to deliver a letter. Now, Jefferson ordered Madison not to deliver commissions to these judges. And so what happens is that the letters were never delivered in time, therefore making all these midnight appointments actually not midnight appointments, because if they didn't get delivered in time, the judges were actually not judges. It made it null and void. However, Marbury said, no, this is not right. So he issues what's a writ of, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but I want to say mandamus. I'm saying that wrong. I apologize. It's late for me. He issues this writ, and this writ, what it states actually is you have to carry out the orders of the higher court. You have to carry this out. If you're someone who's lower ranking, you must carry out the order of whatever has been issued. And that issue would have been the midnight judges. So Marbury's saying, no, I don't care what Jefferson is saying. The midnight judges were already there. Jefferson was supposed to deliver it. He made Madison not do it, or Madison was supposed to deliver. He didn't do it. So he issued the writ. However, the Judiciary Act of 1789 is what is being reviewed here, because that set the foundation for the Supreme Court having a quote-unquote original jurisdiction. That's what Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789 is establishing. So very important. So the case goes directly to the Supreme Court rather than the state government, and so it should have probably gone to the state government rather than where it went, and that was the Supreme Court. So the decision of Marshall and the court, Section 13 Judiciary Act, enabled the court to issue that writ through original jurisdiction in this type of case was unconstitutional, because the Supreme Court right here, it does not have original jurisdiction. It is the state government that has original jurisdiction, not the Supreme Court. They took this to the Supreme Court because they were saying, because the Judiciary Act was, again, that the Judiciary Act is stating that the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction, which they did not. The Supreme Court was saying, no, state governments do. Very important here. So what happens is Marshall ruled that the court could not or did not have the authority to issue the writ, therefore increasing the power of the Supreme Court by establishing judicial review. And the court struck down Section 13 of the Judiciary Act of 1789. And so this is big. Jefferson didn't complain about the fact that they got bigger because they struck down the midnight appointments. And John Marshall is the one. This is called the Marshall Court. Know that, because we'll later go back to that. So the Marshall Court is the one that ruled on this. Very important case. The effects of judicial review. We can challenge things, constitutional or not. Beautiful. Hope you have a great